Thanks everyone for being here. We have a great webinar today with Mike Hansen from Ozark Acres. And we met Mike and his wife Sue at the Carolina Meat Conference in Boone, which is a beautiful place, and thinking of everyone in North Carolina right now. So yeah, Tucker actually noticed Mike and Sue wearing Graze Against the Machine shirts and like walked right up to them and thought the shirts were awesome, and we got some, and then we got to learning about what Mike and Sue are doing on their farm. And yeah, it's really interesting and exciting. Can't wait for you all to hear more. So Mike, feel free to start when you're ready.
Thank you, Yazzie and Camille, for the introduction and for the opportunity to present here today. So today I'm going to talk about how letting our cattle graze in the forest has improved the health of the land, the plants, and the animals. Agenda, I will do an introduction of the farm, and Sue and I'll go over a summary of our projects that we've got going, a little bit about the activism and advocacy work we're doing for healthy food and farms, and then get into regenerative farming, a brief definition of what regenerative farming is, because there's a lot of them out there right now. And then I'll go into the meat of the presentation, which is the impact of the health and the bottom line of what the practices that we have implemented. And then finally, I'll go through some resources and share some links on how you can support us. So Sue and I started farming out here in central North Carolina in Coleridge in 2014. Our motivations really to do this was, number one, to heal Sue from cancer and the treatments that she had had. Sue did a lot of research about food, even organic food, and the nutritional content in it. And with time, she realized it just doesn't have, a peach from 1953 had like 70% or 70 times more nutrition than it did in 2008 when she was doing her research. So we wanted to do this, start a farm, not only to help her heal, but to grow healthy food for our community as well. We're woman-owned, family-run. It's just Sue and I doing all the work, which at times can be a little challenging when Mike gets a knee injury, for example, like he did earlier this year. Why am I speaking about myself in third person? There you go. There's several of me, apparently. We have about 100 acres here, and we moved into a 104-year-old farmhouse that had been abandoned for 13 years in 2014. And that's actually the story about that farmhouse, is how I met Linwood, because he had just recovered from Hurricane Matthew and was going through some of the similar issues that we were trying to do to fix the house up. Our sources of income are from breeding stock. Most of the cattle that we sell go to other farms. The piney woods that we raise are an endangered species, so we're trying to help increase the numbers of that. But there's always a boy left or two every year that doesn't sell, and they're here for 3 to 4 years, and they end up as beef. And as Livestock Conservancy in Pittsburgh like to say, you have to eat a few to save them, and all the income we get from that beef obviously goes back to the farm and helps us sustain the operation. We also sell semen from our bull Rocky. I think he's fathered now calves in 7 states. And we sell Graze Against the Machine t-shirts and stock farming photos and videos as well. And like all farms, small farms in particular, we rely on off-farm income. Next. So I want to make sure that we understand the location that we're in was inhabited by Lumbee, Occaneechi, and several other tribes. This was something that we've learned over time. The principles that we follow are also based in indigenous principles of 7th generation and honorable harvest. I'm not an expert on either of these things, but I will provide some resources to books that you can read to learn more about them. I will give a few examples on how we adapted these principles to our practices as we're going through the slide presentation. And if I don't, then you can ask me at the end. We are ecosystem centered, which means we understand that if we make one decision on one side of the farm, it can impact the other side of the farm. So being very aware of the decisions that we are making and how they impact the ecosystems, not just now, but in 7 generations or 125 years down the road. We are very focused on conservation, both of the forest and the farmland. We are actually trying to put our farm into a conservation easement so it can't be developed in the future, which is important because there's a lot of big manufacturing plants going in near us. Within 15 miles, Toyota is building a battery manufacturing plant, and there's a chip manufacturing plant going up about 4 miles away. So a lot of new people coming into the area, and we want to make sure that we maintain this land for the future. As I mentioned, we raise endangered farm animals, or heritage breeds as they're known. Some of the breeds that we raise are piney woods cattle and cotton patch geese. Cotton patch geese were used to weed cotton and corn and strawberries before the invention of chemical geese. And they, about 6 to 8 of them can weed about every acre. Now, we're just raising them to increase the numbers at the moment, but we love to see them go out and eat Johnson grass and that type of thing in our food and medicine forest. When we talk about biodiversity on the farm, we're talking about functional biodiversity. One example of that is by introducing a native oak tree into the landscape. That oak tree can provide habitat, food, shelter, and so on for about 200 species of native insects. Whereas if we plant a ginkgo biloba, which is not native, it might support less than 10 insects. We grow and forage our own food and medicine. And I always find that I have to say this because people don't really understand the regenerative side of things, but we don't spray any herbicides or pesticides. You'll see a few quotes at the bottom of some of the slides from indigenous leaders that have inspired us in their books through the year. On that note, I want to thank Linwood, who's in the Hallowassaponi tribe of Eastern North Carolina, and also our friend Chris, who's in Creek Nation. So Linwood and Chris have been a big inspiration and kind of help guide us through some of the nuances of the indigenous principles that I mentioned earlier. And that has been really instrumental in us focusing in on some of the decisions that we've made on the farm. So thank you, Linwood. Chris, from the bottom of my heart, I really appreciate you both. Next slide, please. Speaking of quotes, I think this is possibly my favorite quote that I've seen about the farm from a blog that Linwood wrote for the North Carolina Native Ethnobotany Organization. I've got a link to that later on in the slide deck. And it really depicts the importance of trees to our farm and how important they are to anchor what we do and how we do it. Next. So the ongoing projects we've got on the farm, some of the projects we have ongoing right now on the farm, I mentioned conservation of the animals. We're also specifically leaving milkweed stands in the pasture, so we're not mowing them when we're mowing seed heads back, for example, to increase the population of not just monarch butterflies, but all the other insects that those plants support. We're converting a hayfield into a food and medicine forest, mainly with native species. Linwood has been very instrumental in helping us select the right species there. We're improving the dung beetle population in the pastures, and we've been tracking our biodiversity on the farm now for about 4 years, and we've discovered over 680 species of insects and amphibians and plants and mammals and mollusks and crustaceans, you name it. There's a lot here. What we're going to focus on today is the forest management with cattle and how that's helped us reduce the invasive plant species in the forest. It's also helped reduce the fire risk. And then we'll go into some of the benefits and the savings that has created. And because of this, all these things that we've witnessed over the years, we're actively looking for funding to expand into an additional 65 acres of forest and hopefully start doing that in 2025. So on the activism and advocacy front, and I guess it should say education here too, we work locally. We've worked a lot with 4-H, which for my overseas folks on here, 4-H is for kids learning about agriculture. And we've also worked from kindergarten through college education, and we've been involved in a couple of junior achievement career fairs for middle schoolers in Greensboro. We're donating some of the seeds from the grandmother pecan trees, the grandmother walnut trees, and their sycamore trees to nonprofits and local indigenous communities so that we can save those important genetics for future generations. On the state and federal level, we're involved with Carolina Farm Stewardship Association and the North Carolina Food Systems Advocacy Coalition, of which Keith and Kendall are both part. And we have had virtual meetings as well as in-person meetings on Capitol Hill to advocate for more regenerative farm policies. This is a ongoing and as a long-term thing. This does not happen overnight. I've learned sometimes that's very frustrating, but with a group of people that get together on a monthly basis to talk about these things, we tend to have a little bit more energy to give each other instead of sitting, by ourselves on our farm that way. I do have a petition out right now to change some of the forest management policies to include funding for cattle. Unfortunately, right now, there's only funding to manage forests with herbicides and machinery, but not for cattle. And I'll have a link for that so that you can sign it if you haven't already done that right following this sign. And then finally, we're working on improving the definition and the outreach to people in cities and counties across 3 continents right now. My buddy Ash on the call was one of the founding members of that, and he was one of the first people to tag South Africa. We've also done that in Djibouti, in Germany, Denmark, the UK, and Portugal, and in many states in the US as well as up in Canada. So you can take a quick picture of this QR code and it'll give you more details about what the petition's about. And you can complete that later at your leisure. I'll also have a link to it later in the resources. Regenerative farming. Where do I start with this? The standard definitions from Merriam-Webster dictionary are here for sustained and regenerative. That kind of helps outline, where we're at. But really, indigenous communities for thousands of years across the globe have been practicing regenerative practices based on some of the principles I mentioned earlier and other principles that I have not included here. Even Bayer makes Roundup, has said that they're best positioned to take regenerative farming to the next level. So everybody's trying to get in on that regenerative farming train. Just so you know, Bayer is lying because they don't know what regenerative farming is. So, as I mentioned earlier, it's a journey, and learning to distinguish between the principles and practices has possibly been the most important piece of our puzzle, because what we found was adopting practices that we didn't really understand, even though they seemed very popular, like rotational grazing. I'll explain a little bit more about what that is in the next couple of slides. Was not the right choice for us. And as I say here, it's like telling somebody else's story if you put the practices before the principles. And we'll get into how that changed for us. Rotational grazing, for those of you that don't know what that is, it's basically creating smaller paddocks for cattle in pastures to go in one, they eat the grass there, and while the other paddocks are resting, they grow the grass taller. And then you rotate them through that. And the idea is your pastures are going to be better and your cattle are going to be healthier and possibly fatter too, because they have a lot of grass to eat. What we observed through this practice, though, was there was one particular paddock that had a black walnut tree in it. And when we let the cattle in there, they would go straight for it, take a bite, and then they would eat the lush green grass that was beneath their feet. We found out that it had a natural anti-parasitic in it, and that was what we speculated was that was keeping their intestinal worms at bay. And knowing that the piney woods had run wild for 300 years, they were used to going into the forest and pastures and choosing their own food and medicine when they wanted, not when someone else was telling them. So that's what we tried to do by stopping the rotational grazing, was to mimic what they had in the wild as closely as we could. And of course, we had a lot of people reacting to that. We had the same kind of concerns, but what we have learned over time, Linwood says to me often, trust your heart, Mike. And this is exactly what we had to do, is trust our heart. And instead of just following what our head was telling us, which in this case was the exact opposite. I'm not sure. The reason we're taking 4.5 minutes to show this video is that people had been following what we were doing and had been to the farm and seen what we were doing. And some friends of mine said after they saw this video, which was probably 4 years after we had them out and we talked about it ad nauseum, they said that makes more sense than the last 4 years that you talked to me. So I figured let's just take 4 years or 4 minutes, sorry, and show you what I will just ramble on about.
Yes, it's a great video. All right, I'm going to play it.
But it'll definitely give you an idea of the difference in that those piney woods cattle have made.
This is what the 15 acres that we'll visit in a little while used to look like before the piney woods were in there. Pretty much impenetrable.
You gotta watch out for these big old thorns on here.
It's been a while since I've walked through this part of the 63 acres, and it's really reminding me how much work the piney woods have done reducing invasive plant species as well as fire fuel in the 15 acres.
You know, once I get in here, it won't take them long to clean up this part, and then we can start going deeper into the woods. Whew. I'm glad to be back out of that. The part we're gonna go to now is this 15-acre stretch right here. You can see immediately how much more open it is. You just take a quick walk in here. I mean, there's really no comparison for what they've done, and open things up really nicely. Every year we see improvements, and it's quite a big change on, year to year. And I wish I could show you some of the new flowers we got. Unfortunately, they're not in season.
Well, we can rewind the seasons because of filmmaking and share some of the flowers that we're seeing because the canopy has been opened up by the piney woods. These rare Adamasco lilies, ironweed, and cardinal flowers are just some of the flowers we've seen introduced on the forest floor. Piney woods have also uncovered some surprises for us, one of which is a shed that was only 20 or 30 feet off the pasture, which we couldn't see before we let them in. Access to the forest has also allowed us to bring friends in, like our friend Chris, who is a Creek Nation, and he found several indigenous sacred sites, including a place of community celebration, these boulders that you see right here, which has a beautiful hickory tree growing out in the middle of it.
You climb up here. You see those roots just growing right in through there. The shed was just not visible at all. And you can see it wasn't far from here to the pasture.
And the piney woods have now made this shed a shelter for themselves. There's Peaches in there with Rocky. Hey girl, I won't come too close. I know you don't want me in there. With everything the piney woods have achieved, the sunlight now filtering through the canopy so that we were seeing new biodiversity each season, the barn, the indigenous sacred sites, really makes me wonder how much more work and what findings they will uncover when we let them into the 63 acres. Hopefully the tour helped you get some idea of what we're trying to achieve with our Piney Woods cattle on that additional 63 acres. A lot of work for the cattle to do, but it's a lot better than spraying herbicides. Fact of the matter is we can get cost shares if we spray herbicides, which we are never going to do on this farm. We are committed to our regenerative approach, and the Piney Woods are an instrumental part of that. Cost shares or grants for the use of cattle in forest or habitat management are very difficult to find. I'm not even sure that they exist, but we continue to work with nonprofits and other organizations to see if we can find the funding for building a fence around the 63 acres. Graze against the machine.
Moo.
I never listened to that outro. That's great.
You like
Yeah.
Sue's sassy moo at the end of that? That's my favorite part.
That's awesome. Okay, I'll go back to the slides now.
All right. And just some good news. We got some funding. About 3 weeks ago, we were awarded $60,000 grant from a nonprofit in Kentucky to help build the fence. It's not an inexpensive process to do all this, and especially because it's kind of steep where we are, so we have to focus on erosion control and culverts and that type of thing, which has driven the price up for what we're trying to do. But we're really excited. We should break ground on that. Well, we'll see with the weather, but either this month or next. Okay. So hopefully that video gave you some idea of what, the differences between managed forests and unmanaged forests and what has happened in there. The benefits, obviously, to that is that we can continue to capture a lot of, carbon dioxide and other particulates from the atmosphere. We have been hearing a lot of good news about storing carbon in pastures, and I think the verdict is probably still out on how much can be captured. I found this research published in Nature from 2022 that compares silvopastoral systems, which is putting your cattle in the forest, and open pasture lands, and they found that the carbon capture was 27 to 163% more. There's a lot of variation in that number, but I'm sure there will be more to come, more research to come comparing the two and focusing on the benefits of doing regenerative farming just in pasture land. So we're going to move from the benefits to the forest to the benefits to the cattle. And this was a picture that I took of our beautiful girl Blackberry. May have been the first time I witnessed her going, and the rest of the herd going straight to that black walnut tree. And you can see how tall the grass is there. But one of the great things is they're foraging their own medicine, and we believe they're doing more than that. We haven't really paid a lot of attention to which species, but we know, for example, they eat black cherry, which has some medicinal properties as well. The thing about the black cherry is all the farms around us and everybody in the farming universe, it seemed like, said you need to cut all those down before you let the cattle in. Well, we couldn't even get into the forest to identify them when we moved here, so that was pretty much impossible. What we found, though, is that the piney woods, because again they ran wild, they haven't lost that instinct. So black cherry leaves, when they turn brown in the fall, that's when they have the most, I think it's cyanide in them. They don't eat those. They only eat the green leaves, and that we've seen them do that. So there must be something in there that they require for health as well. That has meant that our, vet and medicine bills has been a total of $100 for the last 7 years. And that was because we need Peaches, one of our cows, we think she got tusked by a wild pig and had to bring the vet in to take a look at the wound. And he said that she'll be fine. These are piney woods, they're tough. He didn't even give her an antibiotic shot, and because she could reach it and clean it with her tongue, and sure enough, it healed up just fine. The other thing that we think has improved because of this practice is our dung beetle population is much better. A lot of the medical anti-parasitic medicines that are available, even the ones that say they don't affect dung beetle populations, do. I've got a friend down in Australia who is very into dung beetles, and he has done a lot of testing on this, and he says even the ones that say they don't impact, they still impact the dung beetles negatively. So we've got this natural fertilization, these natural fertilizers going through the soil, also because they bury the dung in the soil, they're aerating it as well. The concerns were not warranted. Surprisingly, I think in terms of the weeds, we anticipated the pasture might get a little bit, we'd need to manage it a bit more, but there's less weeds out there now that the cattle will eat. And in some places, the grass is actually thicker and in better shape than it was when we were rotational grazing. Some places are about the same, but there's definitely no place that has gotten worse. And of course, the cattle, again, I think a little bit of a surprise, the hanging weight, which is when we take the cattle in to slaughter, the steers into slaughter, this is the weight we get after they've removed all the organs and the hoofs and so on, and the hide. And that, as you can see here, we've seen an average of 13.5% increase on their weight as well. And this is comparing, you can't really compare two steers from two different cows because, it's not a fair comparison. We've only had 4 calves in total that we've been able to compare so far to see what the differences has. So that'll increase over time. So what that means on the time side of things, mean that we stopped doing this in 2019 or 2020, I think, from memory. And now we've got a lot more time to focus on, we were converting an old hayfield into a food and medicine forest. Well, planting all those trees, caring for them, carrying water to them, and so on and so forth, takes a lot of work. It's still not perfect, but at least we have the opportunity to get it started and care for it until those trees and shrubs get large enough. We haven't bought any seed to overseed the pastures either, which is another savings. Sometimes we had to do that when we were rotational grazing. We may have to drill some seed out there in the pasture at some point, but this year we've had so much rain, it's kind of hard to see that right now. Our pastures have probably never been in better shape. From a customer perspective, I think that all our approach to land stewardship, animal welfare, and the quality of the beef all kind of melds together. Our friend Nick here was kind enough to write a review for us. I think that all kind of melds together for customer loyalty. And we got a couple that came to us 3 years ago, a vegan couple. He had been vegan for 30 years, wanted to start eating beef again, did some research about us, came to talk to us, and now they buy 20 pounds of beef from us every year. And they're introducing their young son to where his food comes from, and so on and so forth. So, we run the gamut across frequent meat eaters and vegans in this case, or ex-vegans. How this has impacted Sue and I's health, we haven't really changed a lot about what we do. We still enjoy a beer and a shot. But the biggest change is that we mainly eat what we grow and raise on the farm, or from other farms near us that, that like milk, we get milk from a raw milk from a farm that does all organic regenerative practices as well. When we go out to eat, which is rare, we find that we always have a food hangover the next day. So even restaurants that claim that they're not putting a lot in those, we still feel like there's some processed foods going into this, and it seriously impacts our ability. Sometimes it gives you brain fog in the next day, and achy joints as well. It can. So from the anecdotal perspective, Sue hasn't taken any prescription drugs for the last 8 years. She's taken 3 aspirin. That's the only over-the-counter she's taken, and 2 of those were in the winter when she smashed her thumb when we were chopping wood for the house, and she just needed a little bit of pain relief for a day there. And apart from that, she hasn't taken any. This is from the NIH. There's a lot of prescription filled in the U.S. We need to change that. I don't know how, but as Linwood likes to say, Western medicine treats and native medicine heals. And I think this is kind of a good way to show that. The blood test values that I had when I was 43, I had 10 out of range. And now 8 of those are well within range and 2 are just barely out of range. There's some changes happening, and they all seem to be very positive. We do have our apothecary that we rely on a lot of the plants here, both in the summer and the winter. Just a few weeks ago, I got stung 7 times by a wasp or several wasps. And, we've learned with time that plantain that grows in the shade of the shed, you grab that and you mash it up so the juices come out, and then you put it on the sting. It kills the pain almost immediately. Now, in this case, Sue actually taped them with Scotch tape to my body because there was so much, there was a lot of toxins, and that helped draw it out. But generally speaking, I can just, if it's just one sting, I can just smear it on one, and it takes care of that. And what we're seeing again, we were fortunate enough. I think Yazzie and Camille also witnessed Professor Stefan van Vliet's presentation up in Boone. He is testing feedlot grain finished and pasture finished beef. We're hoping to get him to test our wild forage beef too, which includes a lot more diverse species. But he's also finding that there's a lot of benefits to eating grass-fed, pasture finished, whatever you want to call it, beef compared to feedlot raised cattle as well. And we kind of saw this diverse species of grasses, forbs, and shrubs, and thought, well, that needs to have trees, and it needs to have poison ivy in there because they eat poison ivy as well. There's all types of things that those plantains will eat that most other things won't, like Japanese stilt grass. Not because I understand all the details of the different metabolites on there, but it just is a very striking image of how different the levels of metabolites are, which, again, when you're talking about metabolism, that affects all these and more functions in your body. It was kind of striking to see that. Professor Van Vliet also said there needs to be more studies done on how these changes in the beef actually affect human health, and he's planning on doing more studies in 2025. And then also on the well-being side, the cattle are just, man, they just have an instinct about how, whether I'm having a good day or a bad day. Rocky will come to me and stand there, and he'll move on after a while. I'll scratch his shoulders or his head or whatever. But it was probably about 2 years ago, I was having a really bad Sunday, and I can't remember exactly what happened, but I was really feeling like crap. And I went out to find Rocky. I sought him out myself, and he was lying down out here in the pasture. And I laid down probably about 3 feet from him. You got to be careful with those horns because, they can, they're not one swipe, like my friend Matt here said, and they can kill you. Anyway, Matt saw that picture. And when I was talking to him about it a couple of weeks later, he said this quote, and Matt's a therapist as well, and it kind of struck him that that the animals can be a place of healing that way. And Chris, who I've mentioned, Chris is a Iraq War veteran, and he came and got his first piney woods from us back in 2017, and he has successfully used them for himself and for other veterans to treat PTSD and other trauma. Next, I mentioned the North Carolina Native American Ethnobotany Project that Linwood is part of. Please go to this site and look at it. It's got some great information. It's a work in progress. Linwood and the others that are involved in it are volunteers, but it's got some brilliant information on it. And please take a look at the blog, because Linwood is a fantastic storyteller, and you learn a lot from those stories. Our resources online, we've got, go to our resource page. That's a good place to start. You'll find the books I mentioned. You a little bit more about our regenerative farming approach, and some of our trusted suppliers that we work with. You can check out our Grazing Against the Machine YouTube channel for more videos. And we also have a free guide to growing food, a food and medicine forest. And this, you can use this whether you've got a small yard or, a few acres to plant. It gives you some guidance on the native species, what they benefit in terms of insects, and also what they benefit in terms of food and medicine, mainly focusing on the southeastern United States. And how you can support us, there's a number of things in here. I would say the first thing I would ask you to consider is signing our petition. We're trying to get 2,500 signatures, and I think we're at about just over 2,000 now. I will deliver that. It's already been delivered once to Capitol Hill when it had just over 1,000 signatures, which Coldplay actually helped us get to 1,000 signatures fairly quickly. They shared the petition on their Instagram story, and we went from about 500 to 1,000 signatures in a week with them. So that was real helpful. But the 2,500 mark is where we're trying to get, and hopefully going back to the same lawmakers over and over and saying, listen, I'm representing 2,500 people here. This is what they would like to see this change. We'd appreciate that help. So you can contact me. Best place to contact me is on LinkedIn. Taking a little bit of a break from LinkedIn right now, but it's generally the best place to contact me. And you can also follow us on Instagram, or you can email me directly on the farm. And because I like Linwood's quote so much, I included it twice. Thank you, Linwood, man. And here I am with Dave, and we're ready to take your questions.
Hi, Mike. This is Steve from the UK.
Hey, Steve.
Good evening.
Steve.
Good afternoon.
Steve Areno.
Steve Areno.
The world is your lobster, Steve, as I like to call you.
Certainly is. Great presentation. Thanks for bringing us up to speed. I understood the principles well enough earlier, but the detail is really cool. Where are you finding, and this is like, it's a bit of a stupid question really, because I can guess the answer, but where are you finding the majority of the resistance coming from to pushing this concept a little bit more widely in the agricultural community, particularly in your neck of the woods?
So I think it's a question. It's probably a couple of things, Steve. I have conversations with conventional farmers about their practices all the time, and some are, they would like to try the organic. And how do I, organic? They say organic. I don't think they quite gotten to the regenerative place yet. But I've got a neighbor who has raised his cattle conventionally, and his dad did before him, and he just passed away when he was 88 a few years ago. But he's now come to me and having conversations about, what do I have to do to make this happen? Well, when I tell him you have to stop spraying, and it'll take years, that's part of it. The transition is a big part of it. Now, Jeff hasn't put cattle on that pasture for over a year. I haven't had a chance to talk to him because he's had some family things he's going through, but I know he hasn't been spraying either. So that, I don't know what his plans are, but I see that happening. And then there's the other side of the coin where I talk to people that say, you know, when my granddad was growing soybeans, he got 50, let's just say 50 bushels per acre. But by using this Roundup Ready stuff, which you have to spray, you know, chemicals on, I'm getting 150. If you can tell me how I can still make money by changing, is that, you know, they think that if they go back to the old ways, it'll go back down to 50 bushels an acre. And I, you know, again, I don't have the answers to that. You know, if you're relying on that money, it's not there's no silver bullet. And I think the more we can advocate and get and talk to people about it on an ongoing basis. I mean, when I say to farmers that our vet bill has been $100 for the 7 years, they listen. So, you know, it's those types of ongoing conversations that we need to have to kind of show that this can work. It can work, but it does take time.
I think that's right. Ultimately, it's going to be economics. I mean, there's an altruistic perspective to it, and you guys went into this for different reason. You know, when I came to see you and Sue with Joyce, I mean, that was a wonderful experience, and we'll do it again. But the economics have got to work, and it won't work everywhere, but there will be places where it can. So keep up the pressure, particularly trying to get Capitol Hill to get their brains in gear.
Yeah, and with, you know, we just had some good news yesterday on some of the things that we've been advocating for on the nutrition side, and you know, with partners like Kendall and Keith and the other, I don't know, I think we probably represent like over 100,000 people in North Carolina alone. There's a lot of pull that we can have there, but like I said, it takes time. But it sounds like it's changing, because 2 or 3 years ago, some of these lawmakers were just hanging up, and now they're having meetings with us, and it kind of seems like they're listening. And they may only be listening and not doing anything, but we just need to continue down that track.
Okay,
Can
we
you
have,
hear me, Mike?
Yeah, Linwood.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments from across the pond there, Steve. I did want to say too that you're right, the economics have to work, but I would add that the reason so much of the current system's economics working, at least in the US, is foreign policy and subsidies. Everyone has this regal image of the independent farmer, but if you took away all the kickbacks and pork belly stuff, it's not as economical as you would think.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Linwood. And, you know, one of the things we're battling right now is trying to keep the Capitol Hill from expanding all that money going to big farms that grow soy and corn. And I mean, that is a huge part of it. And on the economic side, the other thing that we don't generally take into consideration there is the health perspective. Now, if you look at the medical bills that Sue and I have had since, you know, in 8 years, I mean, they've been pretty much non-existent. So if you're looking at this as a system, we're not just farming for food, we're farming for health. And if we can, this is a bigger battle, trying to get Capitol Hill to understand that, because they work in silos, but we don't. We can see the impact on our health. We can see the savings that are happening there, and those impacts, I'm not sure that anybody is measuring those.
And the other thing I would encourage to listeners, even if you have a yard or not inclined to raise food or plant or animal products, you are a consumer. If you're a human, you're consuming and food. And at least in the U.S., Mike's heard me say a million times, the U.S. food system is a rope, meaning you can't really push on it. You can't mandate people to eat a certain type of food. You can't foist that upon the market. Now, if the consumer demands, in other words, if they pull on the rope is taut and things get done.
Yeah.
The analogy I use many times is, I can tell you in medicine, 20 years ago, no one gave a rat's butt if it was gluten-free. Now, every food in the grocery store is labeled, hey, I'm gluten free. And why is that? It's because that rope got tight and consumers pulled for that. They wanted that. So, in a capitalist system, I encourage everybody, you consume, everyone says be the change. You should consume and eat the change that you want to get your point across. And that doesn't take you going to DC. You vote with your dollars. I hope that makes sense.
It does, Lynn, but and I think it raises another challenge, and that is poverty. In my county, in Randolph County, there's a 27% poverty level. And when people go to the store, they will buy what's cheap and what can feed their family. And that's mostly, if not all, processed food. So that impact on health is happening as well. We have to have huge changes here, folks. This is not an easy one farm, one coalition thing. Getting politicians to change their mindset about how things are affected, that takes time. And we have nutritional supplementation for a lot of people in the United States. Most of these people work a job, if not all. There might be a few that don't. They have a job, but they don't make enough to make ends meet. So they're still having to go out and change that. Now we're starting to see that change, that they can use these benefits at farmers markets. But I'll always go back to, if you have to feed your family on an apple, or you have to feed them on a pizza that'll fill them for a day, you're probably going to buy that pizza. And unfortunately, that's the reality of the situation.
Yeah, these are great points, guys. Thanks for bringing this up. And we have a few questions in the chat too that I'll read. So Emily Sloss, she wants to know, she says, thanks so much, Mike. 2 questions. What style of perimeter fencing are you putting up, and where are reliable places to purchase piney wood stock around central North Carolina?
We use woven wire. A lot of people use high tensile electric fence, and we were actually planning on running several species of, we were going to have goats and pigs and cattle. So that's why we decided that. But I do know others that run on high tensile electric fence. The biggest part of that for me, even with this expansion, is get the cattle getting out. My neighbor has high tensile, and I'm always calling him to get the cattle back in, because it does short out. You can't, even if you're trying to keep weeds from going up around it, it does short out. And I think it just kind of occurred to me as I was saying that, I think having the woven wire, you don't have to spray, and that's what my neighbors have tensile. They have to spray underneath it to keep it from hitting there. So that's one consideration. Piney Woods in central North Carolina, that's where I am. We've always got some available every season. We generally sell them at 10 months once they've naturally weaned from their mamas. We don't pull them away from them earlier than that. And we always sell the girls in pairs, because they bond very much with themselves. Sending one off is not an option for us. So that's something, if you just want one cow, you're gonna have to look somewhere else. Depending on the size of herd that you're looking for, I can help connect you with other breeders as well. There's a few around me that, we can, if we can't come up with the whole herd for you as one, we can work together to bring one together.
Cool. And Paul wants to know, what changes, if any, have you seen with infiltration rates with your soils?
It's a good question, Paul. I'm not sure that we ever really paid attention to runoff in the pastures. So we have, because of the terrain, we have, what are they called? I can't even remember. But the Army Corps of Engineers came in and created platforms for us, and or for the people that were here before, And that kind of helps the runoff a little bit because it doesn't run terrace. Yeah, thanks, Kendall. So that has helped with that. Something I need to pay more attention to, because a lot of people talk about, you know, the rotational grazing helps with absorption. I've never seen puddling last for much longer than a few hours, maybe half a day. So I think it was probably okay to begin with, but yeah, something to look for in the future, Paul. Thank you for that. I think we know that hydrology in the forest, you know, it absorbs more water naturally because of the organic matter on the forest floor. So I suspect it's probably better in there.
And thanks for your questions, everyone. Jackie asks, well, she's been following you a long time and she loves what you're doing. And her question is, you're not using rotational grazing with the cattle. Are you going to open graze or use rotation with other species?
So we don't have any other species right now, but I can tell you when we had Kune's pigs for about 6 months until I had my knee injury earlier this year. And we just let them run with the cattle. They got along with some cattle better than others. The pictured cattle earlier, Blackberry's probably our saltiest. And she would wave her horns at them and warn them to stay away. And initially they just ran. But because we have, you know, the woven wire, we were able to put the pigs in and they generally got along really well. So they have they have helped grow pumpkins and all types of gourds out in the pasture, though, because we would feed them a little bit of that every once in a while. Hey, there's oh man, I've forgotten his name already. His sister's name is Wednesday. Who's the other one in the Adams family? Wednesday, and yeah, that one. Anyway, they have planted a lot of new gourds out we've got some spaghetti squash and different things growing in the pasture that the cattle haven't gotten to yet. So it's one thing. Sorry, I couldn't be more help with your question there.
Tomorrow. So thanks everyone for being here. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Yazzie. Appreciate you. Thank you, everybody, for your questions and for joining today. Thank you, Jackie. I recognize your name. I don't know why, but yeah.
Thanks so much, Mike.
Thank
And
you.
Our next webinar will be October 22nd, and we'll put that in the follow-up email. We're going to be talking about cover crops. So we'll see y'all then.